as I said, it's good someone is doing it, because history is no good if it's hidden away. You know, it needs to be talked about, because who knows? One of our own great children and great-grandchildren might be interested a few years down the road, you know, and unless you tell it now, well, it'll never be told.
Kepa's words resonate with me. History shouldn't be hidden away. History does matter. For the past 10 years, I've been recording some of the social history of the Central Plateau of New Zealand. My most recent work has been researching and making documentary films on the Tongariro Power Development, one of the country's largest civil engineering undertakings. Following on from this is the story of Turangi. Turangi is a town of approximately 3,000, situated on the southern end of Lake Taupo. The town, as we know it today, was built in the mid-1960s to house a large workforce of the Tongariro Power Project. Turangi became a boomtown. Its 1964 population of around 500 peaked at 10,000 by 1970, then experienced a rapid decline with the wind down of the power scheme construction. Unlike some other New Zealand hydro construction towns which simply disappeared, Turangi proved to have permanence and is still here today. The years 1964 to 1983 saw the construction of the Tongariro Power Project. Not large by international standards, but as far as its complexity is concerned, it was right up there. The project catches water from rivers and streams coming off the mountains of the Central Plateau. This water then passes through a series of tunnels, aqueducts, and canals before entering power stations. The one is the underground power station at Rangipo, and the other the Tokaanu power station over which we are flying now. When completed in 1983, this development as a whole provided 40% of the North Island's hydroelectric energy. The building of the hydro town of Turangi is an equally important story, not to be overshadowed by the construction of the power scheme's infrastructure. Unlike the earlier temporary hydro construction sites along the Waikato River, this new township was to be built for permanence. It was to have all the amenities and creature comforts that could sustain and enrich the lives of the workforce and their families. What was to take place from 1964 to 1967 was the construction of a town at a pace unprecedented in the country's history. Since the early planning stages, the southern end of Lake Taupo was the favored location for the new hydro town on lands owned by Ngāti Tuforatoa. The local inhabitants had been in the district for several centuries.
Looking at genealogy, that they've probably been here 300 or 350 years, or even 400 years. It's difficult to say, but that would be the time span, perhaps 400 years. We knew long before the town was built that the power project would come into the district. In the mid-1950s, an English engineering firm, Sir Alexander Gibbs and Partners, were doing survey work in the district. Of course, they had to traverse Maori land to be able to get to the sites of the dams and everything else. And they had to get our consent, tribal consent, to enable them to do this.
After 7 years of investigations, the final GIB report of 1962 recommended the power project proceed. Soon after, the government, through the Ministry of Works, stepped up negotiations with the local landowners.
So throughout the early months of 1964, we went through a process of meeting with the owners on Marae, in Turangi, and also at the Trust Board office, Tuwharetoa Trust Board offices in Tokaanu.
So you personally had quite a bit to do with the negotiations with Tuwharetoa.
Yes, yes. Yes, the negotiations, as I say, Percy Allen, who's the Minister of Works, said if you want to build there, you must have the approval of Tuwharetoa. The initial contact with Tuwharetoa was made by Warren Gibson, who was the project engineer at the time, and he had discussions with Happy Tahuhu, who was the paramount chief. That initiated the series of meetings that was held in Turangi and Tokaanu. What we did get from that eventually was an approval for the power scheme itself, and also for the use of the Turangi West site for the township. So all of that took place prior to final government approval.
The government approved the construction of the first 3 stages of the Tongariro Power Development and the township of Turangi on the 22nd of September 1964, and the first earth-moving machinery moved onto the site on the 24th.
The first thing you have to do in a development like that is to do the earthworks, get the shape of the town right, and then to put in the underground services for sewerage and water supply, power, telephones, and streets, curbs, footpaths. All of that actually precedes the construction of the houses.
There were lots of bare areas, and there were all these huge machines thundering up and down, flattening things out.
My friend lived just across the road, and we'd meet just down the road here to walk to school every morning. So we'd come along and these huge trucks would be going up and down, up and down. So we'd go to school walking that way. They'd have a roadway for us to go walking that way. When we'd come back, we'd have to have a look, and we'd have to come home that way. And then the next time when we go, we'd go down the other way. And it was fascinating.
It wasn't long before the houses came rolling in. Truckload after truckload could be seen on State Highway 1, heading towards Turangi.
We probably trailered in close to 1,000 houses. The houses for workmen were small, but to a much better standard than the housing previously used, for example, in Mangakino.
There were a lot of houses came in, and every day there was a new set, and you could see the houses sort of appearing. But it was quite exciting.
When they got the streets in, then they started to bring in the houses. Well, my friend and I inspected every house as it came in. We had some fun. And the poor carpenter would say, "Will you 2 women get out of here?" Because we'd say, "Don't like this place." "Oh, no, look at the size of that poky little kitchen."
Having been in Ministry of Works villages for a few years before this, all of the houses were the same in those villages, but this one had houses that were different. So our next door neighbour's house didn't look like our house. It was lovely. We were so excited.
A lot of the houses had to be constructed out of Turangi and then transported in, and mine was one of them. And, mine was built in Mount Maunganui and transported to Turangi. It was one of the biggest houses that went through, and it ended up having problems with gum trees at Hatepi, some of the spouting off and things like that.
How did you pick who got what house? Was there a bit of a lottery system? You got thousands of people looking for housing.
They were generally just allocated on the basis of need. I mean, we had a range of houses from small 2-bedroom houses through to larger 4-bedroom houses. And so some of it was based on need. It has to be said there was also, at that time, a status thing. If you go back to Mangakino, you'll find it's quite strictly divided into the workers area and the staff area, and the standard of housing was quite different. At Turangi, we tried to get away from that model.
It was a lot more integrated than other towns had been, where they had a separate part of the town was the staff and the other part was for the wage workers, where there was a lot more mixed up here. And I think it eventually became totally mixed up, which is how it should be.
It's true to say that generally permanent and senior staff would get bigger houses, but the siting of houses was such that these areas were, if you like, shaded, so that you didn't have this demarcation between specifically staff and worker areas.
Was it a pretty orderly procedure, the house allocation?
They did the house allocation, I think, initially for the staff on as they came here. It was because of no housings, and I think it was as you had been here at the top of the list, you got your house in due course. For some people that didn't happen because they had big families and they were building predominantly 3-bedroom houses or 2-bedroom houses, and so the guys with the big families had to wait until the bigger houses were actually built, to the 4-bedroom, and there was some 5-bedroom houses that were built.
We got to the stage where we had 6 children waiting for another one. It came to pass that we had 5 boys and 1 girl. If by chance we had the 7th was going to be a girl, right, we were able to go to Ohio because our eldest girl was then 13. She was entitled to a room of her own and didn't have to have a baby in with her. The whole parish, plus every nun in the country, I think, was praying that we would get a girl. And in the middle of the night, I was rung from Rotorua. Oh, Mr. Lindstrom, you put your order in for a girl. We've got one. Would you take her in place? I said, that'll suit. So therefore, we were entitled to a bigger home, and the only home that was left for a staff member of my calibre was the project engineer's home, and we got it.
Working at that pace, there must have been, obviously challenges and certain issues, certain difficulties.
Well, I think I should refer to the question of dust, because the Turangi Township area is it's volcanic, so the topsoil is largely pumice. It's a very light material. On one of my morning commutes from Aratiti, looking down the length of the lake from Taupo and seeing the dust over the town of Turangi, and I thought, oh no.
When the town was being built, there was a lot of earth-moving machinery around, going flat tack, these big double-ended motor scrapers and all that sort of thing. And of course there's a lot of pumice around, and the pumice dust was just flying everywhere.
And every day you had to go around all the windowsills and you got, about an inch of pumice dust on everything.
But the dust storms used to be so bad that we used to get sent home from school at some days because the dust was in the water.
I can also recall driving on one of the streets in Turangi, and this is a little later when some of the housing was occupied. It was very windy and dusty. And as I drove past this house, I looked across, and here's a lady, cat in full ski gear, including goggles, hanging out the washing.
And the dust, because of course the first thing they did was took all the existing trees out, and we had dust for days and days and days, and then they replanted the trees.
As quickly as they could, they grassed the street verges and they planted trees along the verge. And each person, as they moved into their house, got 3 trees to plant on their section. They got maybe a couple of smaller bushes and a tree. So that's why Turangi looks so good now. It's got trees everywhere. A number of people are a bit annoyed because in the autumn they get all the leaves, but I feel that's a small price to pay for the beauty in the town. There's trees in the car park which attract the tuis and the bellbirds, and it's magnificent to hear them.
Would you have done anything any different during that 10-year construction period?
Yeah, sure. There are some things, but I have to say only detailed things. I think the town is in the right place. I think the quality of construction is right, and that's evidenced by the fact that those houses are sold readily. In terms of liaison with Marionas, it's one thing to explain to the local landowners what's going to happen and to have them approve it and say, yes, we think it's a good idea. But when 50 earth moving machines start moving around on the site a couple of days later, people are inclined to say, we didn't know this was going to happen.
And my husband had fought. He said, I am not moving. My home is here. You can build around me if you like, but I'm not moving. So that's what they did. They built around us. I will teach you.
On a day-to-day basis, I mean, you have a lot of earth-moving machinery moving a lot of dirt every day. And somewhere someone is going to make a mistake. And those sorts of things happen, and you have to deal with them as they arise.
This house used to be my mother-in-law's. This is where Arthur's family home was. And out there were the old offices that belonged to my father-in-law, because he was a historian, and he was a man. He was a scholar, poor Alfred Grace. Anyway, he had some sheds out there that he used as his offices. And I came up and they were moving the offices out because they were going to move us whether we liked it or not. As I was driving past, I could see one of those offices lifted up in the air. I thought, what's going on? This was my home. So we had some very good engineers who were here then in charge of it. Mr. Benyon and Mr. Gardenier. And we just got in touch with them. And they came down and stopped all that.
Well, I can remember the debate over Arthur and Terry's house, which was, as you know, the old house is left on a remnant of land alongside the Rimarai at Turangi. And it was sometimes quite hard to get people to accept that sort of special provision should be made. You know, there was a perception that you went in and you swept everything away. But of course there are some things that you simply have to make provision for.
It took my husband longer than any of us to get used to the change, because we lost our farm. We lost our way of life. And I remember my two girls crying at the yards when our sheep were sold. You know, Mummy, what's happening to our sheep? All our sheep. You know, they just, yes, they were upset. They were upset at first, but then, of course, the friends came and all the other things that happened. So as children get upset, and the next day they're happy, they've forgotten it.
Prior to the power scheme, Turangi was sparsely populated. Some 500 people resided here. An aerial view of the area just prior to 1964 shows a lot of wide open spaces with a strip of development along the main highway, now Taupahi Road. It was the countryside surrounding Turangi that was bustling and providing most of the employment opportunities. Turangi was surrounded by timber country. There had been vast stands of native bush. Rimu and Matai, the Totra, Tawa, Kahikatea, and Miro were all being felled to meet the need for timber in this rapidly developing country. Once the timber was milled, the Maori landowners turned the timber royalties to developing farms. To the west, there was rapid development of both Maori Affairs farms and lands and survey blocks.
It was only through the timber where they could get their resources, financial resources. And then Maori Affairs took over after the Second World War because they finally politically learnt that to have a war you need to have food. So Maori Affairs and Land and Survey developed a lot of these lands here. Pukawa Block, I think it started in 1947, I think. There was 4 return servicemen that benefited of that development. When the Ministry of Works put the road through up to Western Access, well, farms were being developed up there.
The biggest employer, both then and now, was situated on the other side of the river. This was the Hotu and Rangipo prison. The prison was built in 1923, and since its inception, it has been a working prison. The pasture and pine forest between the Tongariro River and the Kaimanawa Mountains are a legacy of the open prison model promoted by one of the early prison superintendents, Archie Banks.
So this is your husband's father?
Yes.
And he worked at the prison?
He was the prison pioneer.
Okay.
Under his leadership, thousands of acres of country considered useless was established as farmland, and those farms today carry 10,000 sheep, 4,000 head of cattle and a large dairy herd.
This working model, established by Archie Banks, has been in place for most of the 90 years of the prison's history. What was Turangi like back in 1939?
There was the bridge with the curve in it, and cars occasionally crashed through it. They didn't realise there was a bend. Taupahi Road, where I live, was then the main highway, and on the left-hand side was Taylor's Lodge, and they had a grocer's shop, and the post office was run from there, and that's what I did. The doctor was renting our two-storied house next door, and they had a little boy the same age as my son. And of course the pair of them, Bugsy he was called, not the son, the doctor's little boy, and he was a little sod. But you couldn't help liking him, you know. There was Sandy Laird, he had a holiday home, but he had retired to there. And next door to that was Joe Frost's fishing shop, and Joe and Sandy fought all the time. Old Sandy would walk into the shop and he'd have 2 pennies, you see, and he'd push in front of everyone else and go, "Cash customer." He wanted his newspaper, you see, for 2pence. Somebody else might have been spending £10, but that didn't worry old Sandy. But he met his match when he did that to Joe Frost. Frost said, "You old..." That's what ended up in the court case. "I'll put my hand down your throat and pull your guts out."
Kutai Street was quite interesting. Initially we didn't have any power, that was it. We started the generator up about 6 o'clock in the morning, and it automatically went off at about 9, 9:30 sort of business. If you were late in getting to bed, you heard the clonk as the solenoid sprang out, and you then had 6 seconds to get into bed.
We used to come to town at 11 o'clock and meet the bus and collect our mail.
Town being?
The post office in Taupahi Road.
In Taupahi Road.
That was the hub of the town at that stage where we collected our mail. And everybody knew everybody, and the mail didn't have to be addressed precise. As long as it was Turangi, most people know where to pick it up and who the mail was for.
George Wilder escaped from this prison.
Yes, that's right. And the little house we lived in that was shifted, George Wilder had actually built that house.
If a prisoner escaped from Rangipo or Hotu, a prison officer would come up to me, to my post office. I'd have to keep my post office shut, but lit up, and sit there with a loaded rifle in case the prisoner decided to break into the post office, you know. And, it wasn't funny. It was frightening.
Bob's father always used to say sometimes the prisoners have got very cunning and they'd wear their shoes back to front, or the odd shoes on odd feet, so you wouldn't get their tracks. But they were usually caught.
What Turangi lacked in commercial development was made up for down the road in Tokaanu. Rarely has a place invoked so many positive memories as Tokaanu. It was the real jewel in the area. Was Tokaanu the happening place as far as, grocery stores?
Oh, Tokaanu. Oh, Tokaanu. Oh, yes, that was a busy place.
And it was an exceptionally busy place on a Saturday morning. And I could say that it was equally as busy, if not busier, than what was then the main street in Taupo.
A thriving town. There was 4 general stores, a billiard saloon, tea rooms, butcher shop, post office, police station, 7 taxis.
7 taxis. Why the need for so many taxis? Where were we going?
Nobody could afford a motor car in those days.
Okay, I understand. Okay, good enough.
You know how short motor cars were in the country in those days. It was a busy little town, and quite an experience. Yeah, we used to be able to get up to the, come up to the butcher shop to do our shopping on a boat. Us kids, we used to have to look around for jobs, and you either got a job in the grocer shop, the butcher shop, or the baker's. Yeah, and a lot of us had to find work to pay towards our schooling. And that's how a lot of us got away to secondary school.
We lived in Tamarine, and then we went over to the coast, and we used to come back every year to Tokaanu when I was about 11 to have holidays with my koro, which I looked forward to for the whole year, to come back to Tokaanu because it was such a lovely place to be in. The first movie theatre was in the Tuwharetoa Trust Hall, which is on the corner in Tokaanu, straight opposite the post office. We used to get full every night. They had pictures 7 nights a week.
Really?
7 nights a week we had pictures. And it used to get absolutely packed.
Can you remember some of the movies as a kid?
Well, it was always the fair dinkum westerns in those days, but it was Roy Rogers and Tarzan and Jane pictures, the Johnny Wismiller, the swimmer. Yeah, so, but all of us actually used to sell bottles just to get a picture fair.
The other popular establishment in Tokaanu was the hotel. The hotel had been the hub of Tokaanu and surrounding communities for more than 100 years. Today, the Tokaanu Hotel is closed and looking rather forlorn. Keith Barnett worked at the hotel for 40 years, 20 of those as manager before retiring in 1993.
Sad, very sad. Today we've just got nothing. Just nothing. It was the hub of the whole area, really. People used to come in from the five mills that were around the area, and Dad would go to the hotel, Mum would go to the pictures, take the children to the pictures or down to the domain baths. And, it was a central meeting place. When they decided on the king country to be dry, there was Princess Tapuya, Johnny you said, no, I want my watering hole left. So there was 5 acres of Tokaanu was designated wet in the whole of the king country. Every one of that royal family had been there and stayed there. We even named with the dining room Turangi, which is the watering hole of the chiefs. And, it was all intimate, it all belonged.
The building of Turangi spelled the end of most commercial enterprises in Tokaanu. The hotel hung on for a number of years, but eventually it too went the way of the other local businesses. Fond memories are all that's left. The commercial activity in Tokaanu would start to shift to Turangi as soon as word of the hydro project leaked out. How did the word get out to you that there was going to be something big happening here?
There was a chap, Barry Campbell, an engineer who was in Mangakino, and he came through with a workforce, and he said to me when he was having a drink before he went back to Mangakino, he says, I'll let you in on a secret, Keith. There's a big development going to go on here. And I hoo-ha'd it. And which I was wrong. I should have passed it on to my superiors.
A Tokaanu businessman, Joe McBride, was not going to miss out on an opportunity right on his doorstep. In 1960, he built a block of shops in Turangi next to the Bridge Lodge on State Highway 1. The Bridge Lodge dates back to the 1920s, while the block of retail shops was built just prior to the start of the Tongariro Power Development. The developer, Joe McBride, was anticipating the huge hydro scheme soon to take place.
And there was a building with 3 shops in it. There was Joe McBride who put the building up, myself in the middle, and Kanji Mora on the other side. And Kanji had the shop in Tokaanu as well, so did Joe.
And so these shops were put there as a temporary place while the town of Turangi was being built?
Well, we knew that that stage that the hydro scheme was going to go ahead, so it was a matter of getting established. Yeah.
So whose idea was it to do this? Was it McBride's idea to have
Joe
this?
McBride did it because his family were old identities down that end of the lake.
You were there quite a good chunk of time before the power scheme was announced.
We were there 4 or 5 years before we could shift up into the town centre, but it was worth it. But in the meantime, there was lots of exploratory work going on, and that so it was pretty definite. But when they did, when Cabinet announced the go-ahead, that was good.
The shops near the Bridge Lodge were providing essential services, while the Ministry of Works was pushing ahead with the development of the town and the all-important shopping centre. Now, the initial plans had a block set aside for commercial development, a shopping complex. How did you sell that to commercial interests?
In principle, what happened is that the sites were advertised for competitive offers. And a number of the sites were made available on a preferential basis to the people who owned the small shops down by the bridge. The pharmacists, for example, moved up to the town centre, so there were a number of preferential allocations like that. For the rest of it, they were tendered on a commercial basis.
The Ministry of Works provided the planning for the town centre and then allocated the sections to those who wanted to
established businesses up there, and this is what the three of us were looking at. We were established, so we could then pick our sections, and we put up a building between the three of us, so that we had 3 shops all adjoining. They had a dairy cum grocery, then the butcher shop with Joe, and then there was the pharmacy with me, then there was a bookshop that was Nick, and so it went on down to the corner.
Construction began in 1965, and builders worked at a torrid pace, often pressured by the new shop owners who wanted to open for business as soon as possible. Shops quickly began to take form as building syndicates from Taupo, Whanganui, and Turangi itself developed all the available sites. The official opening of the shopping centre occurred on September 28, 1966. What brought you to Turangi in the first place?
Money.
A business opportunity?
Yeah, business opportunities, which at my stage of life, I was managing a camera shop in Rotorua, and it was a good job, nice job, everything, but you could only make X number of dollars. Young family coming up. A friend of mine and a relation of my wife's were in Turangi before Turangi started, and happened to mention to him one day, as a chemist, what are you doing in Turangi? And there was only 3 shops in Turangi then, which is near the Bridge Lodge, which was the butcher, the chemist, and Ranji's grocery store. And he said, you come back next year, he said, there'll be 8,000 people here. And so I think that sounds good news.
And so Jack ended up moving to Turangi as well?
Well, he came back to Turangi for a weekend and came to see me, and he said, I've got no skills, but if you were to put up a business down here, what would you advise me to do? And I said, look, there's no takeaways, no hamburger bar. He said, okay. So we got everything set up, and around the corner underneath or beside the furniture store, he went into their building and opened up Jack's Takeaways.
Just started on the 1st of June in '67, opened up the first night, and have been a long weekend as well, and I didn't know it hit me. There's no way. 4 hours later, I had to close the shop, that was it. Everything gone. And from then on, it just kept rolling.
But it really was a zoo. They just lined up outside your burger bar at 10 o'clock at night there.
Yeah, well, 6 o'clock at night when the pubs are closed.
Oh, that's
6
right, they
o'clock.
closed at 6.
Yeah, and then 10 o'clock, yeah. Most nights there would have been 3 of us, just, on the weekends we'd have 7. And one guy doing nothing else but milkshakes. The turnover of that burger bar was equivalent to anybody in Rotorua, if not more.
In your present feelings?
Oh, I wouldn't have lived anywhere else. And my wife doesn't want to go. We've got our plot here. We bought our plot in the graveyard. I ain't going to shift anywhere. It's too good a place.
So, Jan, when did you first come to Turangi?
We actually moved here in 1967. My husband had been working here for 9 months prior.
And what brought you here? Why did you come?
Home appliance retailing.
So you moved here to open your shop?
Yes, my husband's great uncle owned the one in Taupo, and his father actually managed that one up there. So that's how it all started.
Was the business successful right from the beginning? Did it?
Oh yes, very supportive people, and probably the Loki name being in Taupo for so long, people did recognise.
And what was it like to live here in Turangi in those years?
Oh, absolutely fantastic. You really got to know a lot of people in all walks of life. It was great, I have to say.
And lots of sports clubs?
Lots of sports, like the netball was huge because I played netball for many years, and I think in the netball, we had about 14 or even up to 20 teams.
I don't think we've talked to anybody who hasn't said that it was a great place to live and a great place to bring up kids.
Oh, absolutely amazing. It was just, it was just a wonderful community, and, to actually mix in with people from all walks of life, I think that's what made it so special. I mean, even when we at the gymnasium, we had the most amazing balls and things like that. I mean, that's not tradition now, but the times that we had were very special. Because I think 50 years is another 2 years away for the anniversary of the town.
I actually moved in on the 1st of December 1970. I just had baby number 7, and friends of ours, Jean and Pat Duffy, actually owned the big chemist shop, and he'd also, just months before, opened a gift jewellery, costume jewellery shop, and they wished to move on and go to Havelock North, and they'd sold their chemist shop, but nobody was interested in buying their little gift shop. So we bought it, or John bought it for me while I was having baby number 7.
When I left the Ministry of Works, I was only with them for about 4 years. Then I was invited to join a life insurance company. Rather than being an office of its own, I'll put it in Anne's shop. And I worked from there, and of course I then began being interested in Anne's work, and so I took over the running of the watch side, and Anne went into the jewellery side. So, and I learned how to fix watches and clocks and all that sort of thing. That's where we ended up.
It was a very good place to bring up children. It was a multicultural town. Nobody worried how many Maori children there were. They were there first. We were the ones that came in second. And our children had friends, and they've kept those friends, and my nieces and nephews have. They went to school with them, and they have done extremely well in life. Turangi gave us 35 wonderful years to bring up our children, to upskill ourselves, and to make some wonderful friends.
We came to Turangi in 1965 with our parents, my mum and dad, Murdoch and Jackie Harris. They came from Mangakino, and at the time we were a family of 4 children, myself being the eldest, my 2 brothers, Frank and Ken.
How old were you?
I was 5 when I came. It was just a lovely place because everybody knew everyone. And I think what made a difference was that the families, they were all on, like you had young men with their families. They were making good money. You had stay-at-home mums whose job it was to look after the children and to keep the household running. You could leave your bikes anywhere and no one would touch them. They'd know that it would belong to the kid down the road or whatever. But it was just a really lovely atmosphere, and it was a buzzing little town because we had late night shopping on a Thursday night. And I believe even at that time, even the keys to the houses, you could use another key to get into another person's house if it was a similar style. Yeah. So you could do that, and people, I think, had mistakenly gone into the wrong house at one time and used someone else's keys, but everybody knew each other and it didn't matter. We were forever out playing the whole time. From the moment we woke up in the morning, we were out playing till our heads hit the pillow at night time. It was really just a lovely little town to be brought up in.
Prior to the Tongariro Power Project being talked about, so what are we looking at, the early 60s, there were just those few schools scattered from where I started school at Otuko, Tokaanu Māori District High School, which was when the lake was raised, the Tokaanu school was moved to Turangi. And of course there was a one-roomed schoolhouse up at Kurato, and the school out at Lake Taupo. That catered for all the communities that were about, all the Māori communities.
The education landscape would undergo considerable change with the start of the Tongariro Power Development in 1964. At the beginning of the power scheme, Turangi had one school, the Maori Native District School. By the end of 1968, there were 4, 3 primary and 1 high school. The rapidly increasing school enrollment reflected other growth parameters. The workforce more than doubled from 1965 to 1966. The town's population spiraled from 500 in 1964 to 8,000 in 1969, and finally topping out at 10,000 in 1970. One of the first priorities of families moving into Turangi was to enroll their children into school. What they discovered was a dynamic and somewhat turbulent situation.
There are 342 in the primary school and about 84 in the secondary department, which is over at the old school.
And this is increasing by how many?
Well, the Ministry of Works say they will fill 2 houses a day for the next month or possibly even 2 months, and that will give us an increase of 10 to 12 children a day in the primary and 4 to 5 in the secondary.
First of all, we had to convince the education department that we needed a school when there were no pupils. And we said, but 9 months from now you're going to have 200. And they said, well, we'll wait until we've got 200 and then we'll build a school. So we had that sort of process to go through. And then, of course, you get a headmaster appointed who's appropriate for the role of the school. And 12 months later, the role of the school has doubled. Education department says, oh, that head teacher's not qualified now. He's going to have to move and be replaced. And we had that sort of entrenched bureaucracy to deal with, which is quite difficult when you're trying to move things so quickly.
I was given a special class, a hand-picked class of students that had already been at the school. So I had a lot of the local children that already lived in Turangi before the ministry came on site.
Elaine Malloy began teaching at the Maori Native District School in 1964. Elaine recalls some of the challenges during her long teaching career.
They were interesting children because they were quite naive. A lot of them hadn't been out of the community. They liked their bare feet, they liked their horses, they liked the wide open spaces, and this town building up around them, mushrooming around them, was quite overwhelming to them.
We saw what was happening directly around our section because our roaming life changed considerably when the town came. We weren't allowed to go past the end of our drive, really. So we became very confined children.
How about the social interaction of the new kids with the established kids?
Well, that got a bit testy at times, the interaction between the locals and the people coming into town, because the locals were getting outnumbered, of course. And so there were times when there was a little bit of chaos, a little bit of negative interaction with the children.
I had a cousin, Anne Grace, and we're about the same size, same height, similar sort of hair. And somebody had taken out a contract to get her bashed up. And the girls who were to do it mistook us. I was coming out of the school gate one day and I was set upon and given a good belt and walked off down the road with my nose all bloodied. And
the school was growing, just about a class per week, and so there were lots of moves through, lots of new classes being created. Lots of teachers were coming in, they had to get relievers, prefabs went into place. There was just, the school was bursting at its seams. And so then the second school, Hirangi School, was being built, and at the end of 1966, the Turangi Primary School was so big that they had to move the senior students across to the other school. And of course, eventually they had to build a third school, which was Pihanga School.
the town had grown so quickly that we were zoned. And so I went from the big school with all my cousins to Turangi Primary School, and as soon as they built Hirangi Primary School, we went there because that's where we were zoned. That was the area we were zoned in.
That number of kids with 3 primary schools and a huge secondary school, there were a lot of teachers, and we loved the community of teachers that we had then, because they were all about our age, plus a number that were in the important jobs of keeping us all under control.
Keeping you guys in line.
Yeah.
In 1967, an Italian company, Cadolfo Cojafar, was granted a tunneling contract on the Tongariro Power Development. Their expertise was world-renowned, and their contribution would play a vital role in the construction of the Tongariro Power scheme. They brought not only their tunneling skills, but also their culture of family, food, and wine. Vino would flow on any occasion worthy of celebration, and Italian cuisine was destined to be another legacy left by the Italians in Turangi.
Without the Italian who come down and doing the Tongariro scheme, you wouldn't have what is now the Italian cuisine. Everything that they noticed when they come down to do the contract was the fact that the food was terrible, the coffee was terrible, the wine was terrible. They noticed all of those things. When I first arrived here in New Zealand, the first 3 meals I have was mutton and potato, corned beef, mutton and potato.
That's not true.
And I ask the lady who invited me out, I say, is this a national dish or something?
The one thing that the Italians did for Turangi, and all of us, was they changed the way we drank, they changed the way we ate food.
It was Turangi, Waiuru, and Taepi, and Wakune. It was, everybody wants to eat Italian. But outside that area, you couldn't sell a sausage. You couldn't sell a bolognese unless you didn't have bowls.
The Italians' love of food and wine eventually led to several young Cadolfo tunnelers who recognized the potential of Italian cuisine to open restaurants. It all began in Turangi when a couple of young enterprising Italians who had been working for Cadolfo decided to open Albercio, an Italian restaurant. Zaccheo Pizzo and the already renowned chef in the Cipriani Hotel in Venice, Luciano Pellizzone, were willing to take the risk.
Luciano was fantastic. The man can turn rubbish into eatable food. And he could put his hand in the rubbish ton and pull out a meal. And it was incredible.
In spite of being contracted to Cadelpha, Luciano wanted to break out on his own. He would find a ready partner in his chef understudy, Zaccheo.
And Luciano said, oh, well, he said, let's go back in Turangi then, he said. Well, what are we going to do there? We start a restaurant in Turangi, he said.
The two would open Albercio in Turangi. Although there were to be lots of teething problems, Albercio would soon become the best restaurant in town.
We want to have by the restaurant, we have got permit to stay in New Zealand. So Luciano said, you get married, he said. You get married, and you're easy to get a permit. I had a girlfriend, of course, named Gloria, the doctor.
This was a Kiwi girl.
A Kiwi girl, of course. We said, okay, we said to Gloria, said, we're going to get married. Yeah, okay. We didn't speak English, we didn't understand each other anyway, not very well. We didn't even know what was up. All of a sudden, there we go to church, and done. After that, we bought this restaurant. So we knocked everything out, everything gone, start fresh. So we had a little bit of design by hand, the kitchen going to be here, the bar going to be there, the table going to be... And he said, okay, we have to get somebody to build it.
I find this place in Turangi, an empty building about the size of this restaurant. Mm-hmm. At the time, in the camp, they were using purlin to consolidate the roof of the tunnel, which was a very expensive way of doing it. But anyway, they transferred some of those purlin down to Turangi, and they built up Albercio.
So
Albercio was 3 arches.
The building materials,
yeah.
Cadelpha didn't know anything about it,
no,
but,
they didn't.
But the materials were coming from the camp.
Well, but not much, just a few bags of concrete, a little bit of a timber here, a little bit of timber there. So slowly, we halfway up, nearly finished actually the restaurant. The Italian come down and build the restaurant here, do everything. And then the building inspector come along. What are we doing here? Me and Luciano, we said, oh, we're building a restaurant. Where's the permit? But we didn't understand, we don't understand what to say, No, he said, stop, he said, we need to have a permit. But the restaurant was nearly finished, So I said, we said to the Italians, instead you come down Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, come there Saturday or Sunday when there's no building inspector around.
Was it quite a fight to get the permit?
Yes, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we had a big fight about it because they want you to do that and do that. But we already done it. We have to build an extra wall, stronger wall inside because they thought there was an earthquake around here. So, okay, we did that. Then we got the permit to finish, And then we opened the restaurant. The health inspector came along. You haven't got the license. We never had a license. Buy a few boxes of wine and put them in the kitchen. And where we serve them on the teapot.
The things went on for about 6 years. There was no license.
One day, we was there the Sunday night. Every bar, pub shut. Everything was closed. The restaurant was all Italian in the restaurant. And we were serving wine, but the police came in the kitchen. Zach, he said, I heard you're selling wine. I said, we don't sell wine here. Oh, he said, what about all these bottles, he said, underneath the stove there, he said. I said, no, this is a cooking wine, I said. He looked at me and said, oh, yeah, okay. We see you in court. Quite a lot of people in the court. It was about 4 or 5 before us. So the judge was sitting there and he said, get that fellas there and he blah, blah, tell him what he would do. 4 months in jail. The other one, 12 months in jail. 12. I said to my friend here, we go into jail here, we never get out. So Al Taylor came up The judge said to the policeman, I've been to Italy, he said, 4 or 5 times, he said. All the Italians, when they sit down and have a meal, he said, they always like to have a glass of wine. The Italian, he said, they must have a glass of wine when they eat. Not guilty, he said. And the next day, we have so much wine to make everybody in Turangi drunk. But he said, you must get your license.
Turangi was the first hydro town in New Zealand that was built for permanence. This required an arrangement between the Crown, represented by the Ministry of Works, and the local body government, the Taupo County Council. The Turangi Township Act outlined this arrangement, and the Turangi Liaison Committee was set up in 1965 to facilitate the transition of the town to the jurisdiction of the Taupo County Council. John Thorby was a local transport contractor and president of the New Zealand Road Carriers Association. He took an interest in the development of Turangi and was nominated for the liaison committee.
No one got paid. None of us that were here for the county got paid. Different today, of course.
So, John, the liaison committee was a total volunteer organization.
The Ministry of Works people, of course, as part of their salary, it was part of their job, so from that point of view they were paid. But all those that were appointed by the county weren't paid. The composition of the liaison committee, 6 members from the Crown, 6 members from the council. This is the membership chart of the Turangi Liaison Committee, 1965 to 1974. And it lists all the people who served on the committee during that period.
What were some of the points of negotiation, perhaps?
I suppose the big one was how much was it going to cost us as ratepayers.
The biggest issue before finalizing the County Crown agreement was the price to be paid by the county for the facilities taken over from the Crown.
I think there was only one sum involved, and that included everything, like the gymnasium, the other facilities, the sewage works, and all that infrastructure was put in by the ministry. Well, it was certainly in dollars and cents, but I think it was a very, very small sum. I think the ministry were very, very generous in the way they approached it. The underground services were far superior to what we'd experienced in Makakino, for instance. It was really, really top grade, yes.
So Taupo District Council was getting, in a sense, a pretty good deal, a pretty good product.
Yes. I suppose it put the other way around, the community was, because this was enormous infrastructure at virtually no cost. Because the Ministry were very good about it. They were. I suppose they didn't want to have the town on their plate.
The Crown officially turned the town of Turangi over to the Taupo County Council on September 4th, 1974. Turangi, from now on, would be a rate-paying community.
I think it's sound. I wouldn't say it was bright. I think it's we've got a very soundly based town here which will continue, and it'll be a different sort of population with the emphasis perhaps more on retired and people and holiday homes.
The commissioning of the underground Rangipo Power Station in 1983 brought an end to the Tongariro Power Development. The town's population began to shrink with the exodus of many former power scheme workers. Falling pupil numbers would force the closure of some Turangi schools.
The numbers were shrinking all the time as different phases were completed. And as they're completed, people were moving out, and a school had to be closed to start with, and that was the Pihanga Primary in Rangamokia Street.
When Pihanga closed, we could understand the reasons why, but your thinking goes beyond that, particularly when you own whānau, when you own kids, your aunties and uncles and their children, and how it impacts on them.
Although there was acceptance of the Pihanga primary closure, there was still a sense of loss, as a once cohesive school community was now shattered.
Part of a lifetime.
Nothing to come back to.
That's right. All we'll have is just a lot of pleasant memories.
The Pihanga closure was just the beginning of the upheavals that would hit the Turangi education system. The town's population continued to drop throughout the 80s and 90s. The population eventually stabilized at around 3,000. But many included in this number were retirees from the Tongariro Power Development, whose families had already grown and left town. Falling school rolls meant that the government had to move in and make some difficult decisions regarding the school system.
All the primary schools were basically asked to wind down, fold up.
They had already made a half decision to have just one school for Turangi. Maybe what the minister now calls a super school.
They were telling us we were having an area school. The Turangi didn't want that. They didn't want a school that went from new entrance to year 13. They wanted their little schools that they had, their little communities that were based around those little schools. But we had no choice in the matter. The decision was made for us. And it happened very, very quickly. And in a matter of weeks we had to move schools, pack up all our assets and go across to the new site, which was on the site of the previous Tongariro District High School.
But fortunately, by then we had quite a strong group of whānau that were determined to look after education for Māori in a better sense. And Turangi just happened to have quite a huge Māori community of its own, made up of Māori from a whole host of iwi. And that's apart from the established Ngāti Tuwharetoa Māori communities out there.
When we put it to them that we needed a school, a total immersion school, because at the time there were over 250 children in immersion and bilingual education in Turangi. They put it to us that they could house an immersion unit on the Tongariro site because that was a logical place for all schools to merge. We put it to them that it compromised and watered down opportunities for children to converse with each other in Māori in the playground, our proximity to the marae, which would be part of the new school, and the fact that amongst the whānau who wanted this to happen, we had very skilled governance people who would provide the governance necessary for the school. And it actually didn't take long before they came back and gave us the blank canvas and said, write it.
The determination of people like John and Henarata Ham turned what was to be a closure of Hurangi Primary into a new beginning, Te Kura o Hurangi, a Māori language immersion school which is playing an important part in preserving Māori language and culture. At the same time, the Ministry of Education closed most of the Turangi and district primary schools and created a super school on the site of Tongariro High School. Despite these changes, the quality of education remains high and is a reflection of the leadership and the faith that the teachers have in the community.
I think all of us as principals bring our own kind of brand, if you like. Mine is unashamedly focused on kids, and we're working on that. It's necessary for us, any new principal coming into a school kind of sets up his or her own view on how things should be, and then works together with our full team to do the best job that we can do. And that's what we're endeavouring to do.
And got some great kids?
We've got some unbelievably amazing kids. The range of skills that we have of kids in this town is just amazing. There's something special about this place. You can go uptown and you can talk to people that you've known for kind of 40 years or something or other. I think most people who have spent a lot of time in one place, growing up, and it doesn't matter where that place is, it has that bond. And here particularly, that because it was a group of people who were like an extended family who moved around different villages when dams were being built, sadly a lot of those people are now getting they're older and they're sort of passing on and stuff. But whenever there is a tangi or a funeral here, as there has been this week, there's huge reconnections with people.
So the theme of my film is Turangi, a town of the past, and a town with a future.
Mm-hmm.
And you're a believer that there is a strong future.
There absolutely is. We jokingly say now that Taupo is on the way to Turangi, rather than Turangi is on the way to Taupo. We jokingly say that, but...
While I was researching for my films on the Tongariro Power Project, I was fortunate to have the Turangi Library with its extensive archives available to assist me. The history wasn't hidden away. It was ready and open to my search. The first library had its humble beginnings in 1965, and the library is a facility that the community has fought hard to maintain and continued to upgrade over the years.
So the first original Turangi Public Library in the town centre opened on the 14th of August in 1971.
Okay.
And then in 2006, they decided that to do an extension, and the library was a bit small, so they wanted to extend it out. In 2008, we moved back into here after the refurbishment. And of course, we got these beautiful, unique windows, which were designed by a Ngāti Tūwhare artist, Te Māori gardener. And so they're really unique to our little area. They are about the Battle of the Mountains, the four mountains. You had Taranaki, Tauhara, Pūtauaki and Tongariro, who were fighting for the hand of Pihanga in marriage. So the windows are rather beautiful. One side of the building has got the battle, and at the front doors we've got both Tongariro and Pihanga together on side on. So he was the victor and sent all the other male mountains out of the area.
The years of the construction of the Tongariro Power Development were truly glory days. Turangi had the biggest and best construction workforce in New Zealand up until the completion of the power scheme. This skilled workforce put in place the infrastructure to provide vital hydroelectric power at a critical time in the country's development. At the same time, they built a vibrant town and strong community. Turangi truly became and remains a town with heart.